Imagine stepping into a photography studio in 1909, thinking you'll capture a harmless portrait, only to realize the moment the shutter clicks, your life, and your very soul, might never be the same. Elias thought it was just another assignment, a chance to photograph an old family in the Ozarks. But the moment he stepped into that dimly lit studio, something ancient and malevolent awoke. Shadows stretched unnaturally. Children's eyes glowed faintly in the corners. A woman, already dead, moved as if alive, her gaze fixated on him. Every camera ever brought into that room vanished into darkness. Every photographer who dared to capture a portrait disappeared without a trace. And now, Elias is about to learn the horrifying truth. The photographs don't just capture faces, they capture souls. This is the story of the Holloway sisters, a post-mortem photograph and a studio cursed to trap anyone foolish enough to look into its lens. Brace yourself. Once you enter, there is no turning back. The year was 1909, and the modest portrait studio on Sycamore Street, tucked between a cobbler's shop and an abandoned barbershop, was barely surviving. Most families in the small town of Briar Hollow, Missouri, couldn't afford portraits. But one October morning, a quiet knock echoed through the dusty studio, and the man who walked in changed the photographer's life forever. The bell above the door didn't ring, something the photographer Elias Warren noticed immediately. It was impossible. That bell rang for every breeze, every fly, every minor vibration. But when the tall man stepped in, not a single sound stirred. Behind him were his two children, a boy and a girl, dressed in stiff Sunday clothing and staring ahead with unsettling stillness, as if waiting for a command. The man spoke first. "We need a family portrait." His voice had a strange calmness. Not deep, not soft. Just perfectly flat. And when he smiled, Elias noticed the strangest thing. The smile didn't reach his eyes. In fact, his eyes didn't move at all. They remained stiff, glassy, fixed, as if painted onto his face. Elias forced a nervous smile. "Of course, please, step into the light." The children obeyed instantly. Not a hint of hesitation, no curiosity, no blinking. They simply walked like small mannequins placed into motion. But the father, he moved slower, too slow. As if every gesture required thought. Elias positioned them on the small set, mother's chair empty, father standing tall behind it, hands resting on the backrest, children seated. Classic pose. But something felt wrong. The room grew colder. The shadows deepened, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling the man's face wasn't entirely real. "Please hold still," Elias said, adjusting his camera. The boy and girl didn't even twitch, but as Elias leaned closer to adjust the father's posture, he froze mid-step. The skin on the father's cheek wasn't warm. It wasn't cold either. It felt like touching hardened wax. Before Elias could react, the man's head tilted. Not slowly, not gently, but with a rigid, unnatural jerk. "Is something wrong?" The father's lips moved, but the rest of his face remained frozen. "No, nothing," Elias muttered, stepping back. He snapped the first photograph. The flash burst across the room. The children didn't blink. The father didn't flinch. But the smell... A faint odor of old soil and rotting leaves drifted from the man's clothes when the flash illuminated him. Elias pretended not to notice. "Let's take one more," he said softly. As he prepared the next shot, Elias glanced up and nearly dropped the camera. The father's expression had changed. The smile was wider. Much wider. Too wide. Elias hadn't seen him move. Not an inch. Yet the grin had stretched across his face like someone pulling clay. And worst of all, one of the father's eyes was now pointed directly at Elias. Even though the head had not turned, Elias's blood ran cold. He swallowed a tremble. "All right, hold that pose." The flash exploded again. And this time, the father whispered something. Barely audible, barely human. A hiss, a scrape, a low exhale dragging across syllables like broken bones sliding. The children turned their heads toward Elias in perfect synchronization. Their eyes were hollow, not sad. Empty. Elias took a step back, breath quickening. "Is your wife not joining today?" The father's head jerked toward him with a disturbing crack of vertebrae. "She's already in the picture." Elias froze. What do you mean?" The father didn't reply. But the smile stretched further, skin straining, dimples tearing slightly. And from the corner of the room, from the deepest shadow behind a curtain, something shifted. Something wearing a pale dress. Something moving on all fours. Something crawling silently toward the family. Elias stumbled back, heart hammering. But the father lifted one stiff finger, pressed it against his unmoving lips and whispered, "Don't interrupt." The portrait. As the shape behind the curtain rose, the air thickened. Elias saw the outline of long hair, a sunken face, and dirt-coated hands. A woman. A dead woman. Her head tilted sideways, mouth slack, eyes black with soil. Standing right behind the father, Elias's breath left him. She was visible only when the camera flash faded, never in full light, never fully still. The father whispered again. She insisted, "We take one last family photo together." And then, the dead woman placed her rotting hand on the father's shoulder. The children smiled for the first time. And Elias knew. He should never have opened the studio that morning. The dead woman's hand rested on the father's shoulder like a broken branch. Light, brittle, yet somehow powerful enough to freeze the entire room. Elias felt his knees weaken. His throat locked. Something inside him begged to run, but every muscle refused to move. The father's smile didn't shift. The children didn't blink. But the woman, she leaned closer. Her neck hung unnaturally loose, as though it had snapped days before and never healed. Damp strands of hair clung to her face, slick with soil, moss, and something far darker. She smelled like the inside of a flooded grave. Wet wood, decayed cloth, and something metallic. Something like blood. Elias stepped backward until his heel struck a wooden crate. The loud crack echoed through the studio like a gunshot. The children's heads snapped toward him at the same time. Perfectly synchronized. Too fast. Too quiet. Elias swallowed hard. I didn't know there was. You weren't supposed to. The father's voice was now deeper. Not louder. Just heavier, like it was coming from beneath the floorboards. The dead woman opened her mouth, but instead of a scream, a faint, muffled sound seeped out. The sound of soil shifting, scattering, collapsing. Elias's stomach turned. She had been buried recently. Very recently, the father spoke again. We promised her this before the earth took her. Elias's hands trembled. Sir, with respect, I can't photograph. The father's head jerked violently, snapping toward him with a wet crack. You will. The children rose slowly from their chairs, their clothes making no sound. The girl's braided hair loosened strand by strand, as if pulled by invisible fingers. The boy's tongue pressed against the inside of his cheek, stretching against skin like something alive was crawling under it. Elias braced himself on the camera. His vision blurred. Sir, he whispered, this woman, she's not alive? The father smiled wider. A grotesque stretch that split the corners of his lips. She wasn't supposed to wake up. The dead woman's head twitched. Her eyes rolled upward. Her jaw hung slack. And then, she lifted her hand. Elias didn't breathe. She pointed at the camera. Her finger trembled, crooked, broken in two places, bones pushing against the thin, pale skin. The father whispered, It's her last wish. Elias forced air into his lungs. He didn't know why. Maybe sheer terror, maybe instinct. But he moved toward the camera. His mind screamed run, but something in the air held him captive. Thick, heavy, like invisible hands wrapped around his wrists. The father adjusted his posture. The children stood at his sides, and the dead woman slowly drifted behind the father, her head resting unnaturally on his shoulder. Her eyes stared at Elias. Not with anger, not with sorrow, just hunger. Elias braced himself, raised the shutter lever, and whispered, Hold still. The dead woman grinned, a horrible, toothless smile stretching impossibly wide. Elias clicked the shutter. The flash exploded, and in that millisecond of blinding white light, the father's face changed. Not subtly, not gradually, completely. Skin sagged, eyes hollowed, cheekbones sharpened. The grin twisted upward past the cheekbones into something inhuman. His entire face warped into the frozen expression of something long dead. The flash faded. The father's face returned to normal, but only on the surface. His eyes weren't human anymore. They were deep, empty, bottomless, like something ancient was staring back from behind them. He tilted his head, cracking each vertebra like snapping twigs. That one, he whispered, was perfect. But the woman behind him, she wasn't smiling now. She wasn't still. Her crooked jaw was opening. Wider. 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 The children stepped closer to Elias, their faces blank. Mother wants one more, the boy murmured. The girl nodded, her voice a whisper of dead leaves. For the family. The dead woman's jaw dropped until it unhinged. Her mouth stretched far too wide. A black, wet, writhing darkness pulsed in her throat, like something inside her was reaching forward. Reaching for Elias. The temperature in the studio plummeted. The air turned to ice, burning in Elias's lungs. He stumbled back. No more. I won't. The father's hand slammed onto the camera tripod with unnatural force, metal bending beneath his grip. You will, he said softly. But this time we want you in the picture. Elias stared in horror. The children smiled behind him. The dead woman crawled forward, her broken jaw hanging loosely. and the father stepped toward Elias, casting a shadow that didn't match the shape of his body. Elias tried to scream, but a cold hand from behind gripped his wrist. The dead woman whispered, "Join us." Elias tore his arm away with a violent jerk, stumbling backwards so hard he nearly toppled the camera stand. The dead woman's hand dropped sharply, hanging limp at her side like a snapped rope. She didn't react. She didn't blink, but her head tilted, listening, tasting the fear in the room. The father stepped closer, his shoes making no sound on the wooden floor. The children flanked him, their shadows stretching on the wall in long, impossible shapes, as if their bodies were normal but their souls weren't. Elias felt the entire studio swallowing him whole. "No," he choked out. "I'm not part of this." "I'm not. You already are." The father said it softly, like stating a fact. Elias glanced at the doorway. Still open. Still only 10 feet away, but something in the air made the distance feel like a mile. He took one step toward it. The boy moved in front of him. Fast. Too fast. His little feet didn't tap the floor. They glided. "Stay," the boy whispered. His voice was layered, like a child's voice echoing from inside a well. Elias backed up, bumping into the cold metal of his camera. The girl approached next, hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes were glassy, but behind them, something was crawling, like insects pressing against thin ice. "You're shaking," she said gently. "You shouldn't shake." "It blurs the picture." Elias stared at her. Her pupils pulsed, expanding and contracting like living things. He could feel the father's gaze burning holes through him. "You don't understand," Elias whispered. "Whatever this is, leave me out of it." The father took one slow step forward. "You think this was about you?" His smile widened. "No, you were simply the one who opened the door." A cold whisper brushed Elias's ear. The dead woman. Her voice was a wet rasp, like stones grinding beneath the river mud. "Let us keep you." Elias spun. She was inches from him. Her face had changed. The left cheek had torn open. A thin slit revealed the muscle beneath, and something moving inside it, pushing outward, stretching the skin from within. Elias gagged. The father reached into his coat pocket slowly, deliberately, as if performing a ritual of muscle memory. He pulled out a photograph, a studio portrait. Old. Yellowed at the edges, it showed a family seated politely. A mother. A father. 2 children. A typical 1900s portrait, except the mother's face was missing. Not scratched out, not damaged, just blank. A smooth, skin-colored void where features should be. The father offered the photo to Elias. "This was taken here," he said lightly. "By the photographer before you." Elias's throat closed. The mother in the picture. Her face was empty, but her body was posed calmly, hands resting in her lap, as if her face hadn't disappeared, as if it had been taken. Elias shook his head slowly. "What do you want from me?" The father leaned close, his breath cold as a crypt. "Faces," he whispered. Elias felt something behind him, the dead woman again. Her fingers brushed the side of his cheek. Lightly. Exploring. Testing the elasticity of his skin. The boy and girl joined her, tiny fingers touching his temples, tracing the lines of his jaw. "You have a good one," the girl said sweetly. "It fits." Elias shoved them away and grabbed the camera stand like a weapon. "Stay back." The father chuckled. It was low, bitter, and deeply amused. "You think we need to touch you?" His smile stretched unnaturally. "We only need to look." Elias froze. The father stared directly into his eyes, and Elias felt it, a pressure behind his forehead. Something pulling, pressing, tugging at the inside of his skull. He gasped, clutching his head in agony. The children began humming, a soft, broken melody that sounded like an out-of-tune lullaby. The dead woman reached forward, her fingers trembling with anticipation, and the father whispered, "Hold still, or your face will tear." Elias dropped to his knees, screaming as an invisible force tugged at his skin, as if his own face wanted to rip itself off and crawl away. The world warped around him. Voices layered. Shadows thickened. His vision dimmed. One last thought echoed through him. "If they take my face, will I disappear too?" The father leaned in one final time. "We're almost done." Elias collapsed onto the floor, hands clutching his head, gasping for air that seemed thick and heavy, as if the very atmosphere had turned to syrup. The studio walls pulsed in dim shadows, stretching like skin over bones he couldn't see. The children and the father circled him silently, their movements unnaturally smooth, deliberate, predatory. The dead woman leaned closer, so close Elias could feel her breath. Or was it the smell of rot and soil that burned his nostrils? Her crooked mouth opened slowly, revealing teeth blackened with dirt. She whispered, "Your face is ready." Elias scrambled back, camera clattering to the floor. He could hear the echo of its metal parts like distant screams in a canyon. The father bent down, his unnatural smile widening. His eyes, empty yet piercing, fixed on Elias as if staring into his very soul. "You know what must happen," the father said softly. "You open the door. Now the photograph will be complete." Elias shook his head violently. "No. I don't belong in this." The children giggled faintly, a sound like wind rattling through dead leaves. The girl's pale fingers traced the edge of Elias's jaw. The boy leaned in, their cold hands brushing his temples. Elias's vision blurred. He felt a tugging sensation across his face, like invisible fingers stretching his skin. Then, the father held up a hand. Time seemed to slow. The dead woman, still pressed close, froze in mid-motion. Even the children stopped their humming. The father whispered, calm as death, "Look into the camera. Only then will it be finished." Elias forced his body upright, trembling violently, and stumbled toward the fallen camera. His eyes met the lens. The moment he did, the room changed. Shadows deepened unnaturally. The temperature dropped to freezing, frosting the edges of the glass plate. He saw them, his reflection fractured. Not only his own face, but other faces pressed behind him. Twisted, pale, eyes hollow, mouths frozen in silent screams. They pressed against his back, his sides, his chest. Elias realized they weren't just reflections. They were trapped souls. All the previous photographers, all the people who had unknowingly entered this cursed studio. The father's voice whispered again, closer this time. "You see them now, don't you? They waited for someone brave, or foolish, enough to finish what was started." Elias tried to step back, but his feet wouldn't obey. He turned his head slightly. The dead woman's jaw unhinged. The children's faces elongated, stretching like wax in the heat. Every blink of his eyes revealed a new horror pressed against him, a new layer of despair. "You will take the picture," the father said, voice like a cold wind scraping stone, "or your face will become one of theirs." Elias's hands trembled violently as he raised the camera to his eye. Every nerve screamed to drop it, run, escape, but he couldn't. He couldn't stop the inevitability of what was happening. As he pressed the shutter, a scream erupted, not from him, but from the photograph itself. The glass plate shimmered. Faces inside twisted and writhed, clawing at the surface like trapped insects. The father leaned closer, smiling. "You are part of it now," he whispered. The camera's flash illuminated the studio. In that moment, Elias saw the truth. The dead woman, the children, the father, none were entirely human. They were vessels, containers of something older, hungrier. And with the photograph, he too had become trapped. The flash faded. Silence returned, except the studio was no longer empty. The lens held Elias's face. But it wasn't alone. Behind him, faint but unmistakable, pressed against the glass, dozens of pale, hollow-eyed faces, photographers, strangers, victims, all staring out, mouths open in silent screams. The father's voice floated softly in the darkness. "Now, the photograph is complete. The curse continues." Elias stumbled back, the room spinning, and for the first time he understood. This studio was never about pictures. It was about souls. And now, one more had joined them. Elias fell to his knees, gasping. The camera lay at his feet, yet it felt impossibly heavy, like it carried centuries of trapped fear in its dark lens. The faces of the previous victims stared up at him from the glass plate, pressed and twisted, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent agony. His own reflection blinked back at him, but it wasn't alone. The father moved slowly, deliberately, toward him. Every step echoed unnaturally, though the floorboards remained undisturbed. The dead woman floated behind him, her crooked jaw hanging open, revealing the dark void of her throat. The children flanked the father, faces pale, perfectly still, yet their shadows writhed unnaturally, twisting along the walls like black smoke. "You can see them now," the father whispered, his voice a mixture of menace and curiosity. "All of them. All the souls that dared to enter this studio. And soon, you will join them." Elias shook his head violently. "No. I didn't ask for this. I'm not part of your horror." The father smiled wider. Not a natural smile, but one that stretched impossibly across his face, skin pulling tight, almost cracking at the edges. "You already are," he said softly. The dead woman's hand reached for Elias, but instead of touching him, it hovered inches from his shoulder. A strange heat radiated from her fingers, burning the air, freezing his blood at the same time. She whispered again, low and wet. "Look into the glass. Only then will it be complete." Elias forced himself to lift the camera. His trembling hands barely held it steady. He looked into the lens. And the eye staring back was not entirely his own. The pupil was too large, too dark. Shadows moved within it, flickering like smoke. Faces pressed against the inside of his iris, mouths opening, screaming silently. His heart pounded. Sweat ran down his face. But he couldn't look away. "Do it," the father said. "Take the picture. Only then will your face be safe temporarily." Elias pressed the shutter. The flash erupted violently, blinding him. Shadows danced and screamed across the walls. The dead woman and the children flickered, stretching and distorting. And then, he saw it. The father's face, melting, twisting, transforming. Skin peeled like wax. Teeth protruded unnaturally, eyes hollow and endless. Behind him, hundreds of faint faces pressed against the walls, screaming silently. When the flash faded, everything was still. The father's face returned to normal. The children were motionless again. The dead woman hovered behind them. Elias looked at the camera. The glass plate held a single image. The family smiled. But behind them, his face, twisted, hollow-eyed, mouth frozen in silent scream. Elias stumbled back. "No, this can't be." The father's voice, calm as ice, floated in the room. "It is done. You are now part of the collection, forever." The air grew colder, shadows pressed closer. Elias's body shook violently. He could feel something crawling beneath his skin. Something reaching for his face, trying to pull him into the glass. The dead woman's jaw, unhinged. She whispered, "Welcome to the photograph." And Elias realized the terrifying truth. He could never leave this studio. Not truly, not alive, not as himself. The camera clicked once more on its own. And the photograph began to develop itself. Elias staggered backward, eyes locked on the camera. The photograph developing before him seemed alive. Faces shimmered and twisted in the emulsion. Some screaming, some crying, some with eyes hollowed and pleading. And at the center, his own face stared back. Hollow, pale, mouth frozen in terror. The father's tall frame loomed behind the children. His smile remained perfectly still, unchanging, as though carved from stone. "You see now," he said, voice low and cold, "what it means to enter the photograph. You do not leave. Not truly. Not ever." The dead woman floated closer, dragging her decayed fingers along the surface of the emerging photograph. Elias could feel her touch through the glass, icy and unnerving. His vision blurred, and he felt as though his very essence was being pulled toward the image. "You belong here," whispered the girl, her voice echoing unnaturally, layered with 100 other children's tones. She reached for his hand. "It's safer if you sit." Elias stumbled onto a chair, shaking uncontrollably. Every muscle in his body trembled. He tried to look away, tried to close his eyes, but he couldn't. The photograph called to him. Its surface shimmered like liquid, and the faces pressed forward, desperate, clawing, crying silently. The father leaned in closer, placing a stiff hand on Elias's shoulder. "Cold. Solid. Dead cold. You cannot resist," he said. "Once captured, the photograph will hold your suffering forever. And yet, you will smile for us." The children and the dead woman pressed closer. Elias's mind reeled. He wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but his body refused. His face pressed forward involuntarily, matching the camera's lens. The air in the room thickened. Dust swirled in the faint light, forming shapes, faces, hands, mouths. All trapped. All screaming, all silent. A single whisper brushed against his ear, wet and dark. "Don't blink, or you disappear before the shutter catches you." Elias opened his eyes wide. His vision split. The studio walls seemed to stretch endlessly. Shadows pooled in corners, black and writhing. The children's eyes glowed faintly, a spectral light. The father's face seemed to pulse, skin moving as if breathing. The dead woman raised her arm and placed her hand over Elias's cheek. It was soft, warm, and yet cold at the same time. She whispered, "Now, you are part of us. The photograph will not let you go. Never." The camera clicked again. The flash burst, blinding. Elias screamed, but it didn't come out. It was captured in the frame, locked, frozen forever. When the light faded, he saw himself, his own face twisted in terror, smiling faintly at the camera. And he knew in that instant what the father had meant. The photograph doesn't just capture the image. It captures the soul. Elias slumped in the chair, chest heaving, skin pale as ash. The children and the dead woman hovered over him, smiling silently. The father straightened, hands behind his back, observing his work like a sculptor admiring a masterpiece. "You are complete," the father said softly. "Forever." The shadows thickened. The room grew colder, and somewhere, deep in the glass of the photograph, Elias felt the other trapped souls stir, whispering, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter the studio. Elias's body shook as he tried to stand, but the studio floor felt like it had melted into thick, black tar, sticking to his shoes. Every step was a struggle. The camera still lay before him, glowing faintly, almost alive. His face in the glass photograph seemed to watch him, smiling, screaming, pleading. All at once, the father stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back, moving with a precision that made Elias's stomach turn. "You see them now, don't you?" he said. "The silent observers. They watch, they wait, they judge. And soon, they will take your place." The dead woman leaned in, her decayed hair brushing Elias's shoulder. She whispered, wet and rasping, "They never leave. Not the captured, not the foolish, not the ones who think they can escape." The children flanked the father once again, their movements eerily synchronized. Their eyes were hollow, yet full of an intelligence that made Elias shiver. The boy tilted his head slightly, and Elias could almost see the gears turning behind his empty gaze. The girl reached out, her cold fingers grazing Elias's wrist. "They are watching you," she said softly. Every moment, every thought. Elias staggered back, tripping over the camera stand. It crashed to the floor with a metallic clatter. The sound echoed unnaturally long, bouncing off the walls that now seemed to close in around him. The shadows of the room stretched and coiled like living serpents. He could feel them moving along the edges of the floor, along the walls, curling toward him. Each shadow contained faces, twisted, pale, silent, their mouths opening and closing in unison as if chanting a wordless prayer. The father knelt down, his face inches from Elias's own. "They are patient," he whispered. "They always wait for the next one. The photograph is hungry. It wants a witness. And now, it wants you." Elias looked at the glass plate. His reflection stared back at him, but no longer alone. Behind his own terrified eyes, hundreds of others blinked silently. Their faces pressed against the inside of the glass, mouths open, screaming without sound. The dead woman tilted her head. "Soon, you will see everything they've seen. Everything they've felt. Everything they've suffered. And then you will stay." Elias tried to turn, tried to run, but the shadows gripped him. His feet were frozen in place. He felt the invisible fingers of the room, cold and insistent, wrapping around his ankles, dragging him toward the camera. "Hold still," the father said softly, "or the silent observers will take you first." The children hummed their broken lullaby, the sound growing louder, filling the room with a pressure that made Elias's ears ache. His heart raced. Sweat poured down his face. And then he realized the truth. Every photographer who had entered this studio had felt this same dread. Every soul had been trapped in the photograph. And now he was next. The father smiled. The dead woman's hand brushed his cheek. The children's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Elias's reflection twisted once more, mouth frozen in a silent scream, and the shadows of the room whispered, "Welcome to eternity." The studio had changed. Elias could feel it in every bone. The walls were no longer wooden planks. They seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. Shadows coiled along the ceiling, thick and writhing, pressing closer to him, whispering his name in tones that scraped against his sanity. The glass photograph on the floor pulsed faintly, and from it, tiny pale hands pressed outward as if trying to escape. Each hand bore faces. Faces of photographers long gone, faces of strangers, and now, Elias's own face mirrored in terror and despair. The father's figure loomed over him, impossibly tall, the shadows from his frame merging with the darkness around the room. His smile was frozen, unnatural, and his voice was calm, almost gentle. "They're whispering, Elias. The souls trapped within the glass, they speak to each other. They wait for you to answer." Elias's vision flickered. The children hovered at the father's sides, silent observers. Their pale eyes glowed faintly as the shadows wrapped around their bodies, giving them a spectral, almost ethereal presence. The dead woman approached slowly, dragging her broken fingers along the edges of the developing photograph. Her whisper was wet and hollow, curling into Elias's ear. "Listen, they tell stories. They tell secrets. They warn you, but it's too late. You've opened the door. You belong to us now." Elias tried to speak, tried to protest, but his voice was gone. His throat felt frozen. He could only nod, paralyzed as the shadows pressed closer. Each whisper from the glass seemed to pierce his mind, flooding it with memories that were not his own. Memories of other victims, their terror, their despair, their final moments. The father knelt down, placing his cold hand over Elias's shoulder. "Do you hear them?" he asked. "They are patient, but hungry. They want a witness. And you will be their witness forever." The children hummed their broken lullaby. It filled the room with a thick, suffocating presence. Elias felt the walls bending inward, the shadows whispering his name louder, until it became unbearable. The dead woman leaned in, her face inches from his own. Her eyes were hollow, black as tar, yet burning with a terrible ancient intelligence. "You will speak for them," she rasped, "or you will be silent forever." The glass photograph pulsed again, the faces within twisting and writhing. Elias could see hands pressing through the surface, faces screaming silently, mouths opening and closing as though trapped in a soundless scream. The father whispered softly, "Look into the glass, and you will see everything. Everything that has been, and everything that will be." Elias's eyes locked onto the photograph. The moment he did, the shadows seemed to solidify, crawling along the walls like living things. The faces in the glass pressed forward, mouths opening wider, eyes staring deeper, and Elias realized with horror, once he looked, there was no turning back. The dead woman's voice crawled into his mind, wet and hollow. "See? And become one of us." The children hummed louder, and the father's smile stretched impossibly wide. Elias's hands trembled as he reached for the camera, the room bending around him. The glass photograph pulsed, calling, whispering, demanding, and somewhere deep in the darkness, the studio itself seemed to sigh in anticipation. Elias's hands shook as he gripped the camera. His reflection in the glass photograph stared back at him, hollow-eyed, mouth frozen in terror. Shadows pooled thickly around the room, twisting and stretching, reaching for him with invisible fingers. Every breath he took felt thick, tainted, like smoke curling into his lungs. The father stepped forward, his towering silhouette merging with the darkness. "Do you understand now?" he whispered. "The photograph is not merely an image. It is a cage, a prison for souls. And now, yours is next." The children hovered silently beside him, pale and unblinking. Their soft, eerie humming filled the room, vibrating through Elias's bones. The dead woman floated closer, her crooked jaw opening wider with each step, whispering in wet, rasping tones, "Face the glass, or be lost." Elias tried to pull away, but the shadows had him trapped. His feet refused to move. The room itself seemed alive, pressing in from every corner, whispering, moaning, urging him closer. He looked down at the photograph. Faces pressed against the surface, countless pale eyes staring silently. Mouths opened and closed, screaming silently, begging, pleading. And in the center, his own face stared back, already half transformed, eyes hollow, mouth frozen in silent horror. The father's voice echoed, calm but terrifying. "It is time. Take the picture, or join them." Elias forced himself to lift the camera to his eye. The flash erupted, blinding. Shadows convulsed around him, faces in the photograph twisting and reaching outward. The children hummed louder, their tones harmonizing with the unseen chorus of trapped souls. He pressed the shutter. The world exploded in light. Elias felt a pull, a tugging at the very core of his being, dragging him toward the glass. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed instantly, absorbed into the photograph. The dead woman's fingers grazed his face, cold and clammy, pulling him forward. When the light faded, Elias's reflection had fully joined the trapped souls within the photograph. His face stared out, hollow and twisted, eyes screaming silently. The shadows receded slightly, leaving him on his knees, body trembling. The father's smile was serene. "Complete," he said softly. "The collection grows, and the photograph waits for the next witness." The children stepped aside, hands folded, humming a lullaby that echoed through the walls. The dead woman hovered over the photograph, her hollow eyes glinting with satisfaction. Elias collapsed, utterly drained, body trembling. He could still see the eyes of the other trapped souls, whispering, begging, waiting. And he understood. In this studio, nothing leaves untouched. He had survived physically, but his spirit, his essence, had already joined the collection. And the father's voice lingered in the shadows. Soon, another will enter, and the photograph will hunger again. Elias slumped in the studio chair, shaking violently. The air was thick with shadows that moved like living things, curling and twisting across the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. The camera, still on the floor, glowed faintly, as if pulsing with the life of the trapped souls inside its glass. The father stood silently, tall and calm, watching him. The children remained at his sides, pale and unblinking, their hollow eyes following every twitch of Elias's body. The dead woman hovered nearby, her crooked jaw opening in a silent, wet rasp. "You understand now," the father said softly, his voice echoing in the thick, cold air. "The photograph It does not merely capture a face. It captures the essence, the soul, and once it does, it never lets go. Elias tried to speak, tried to demand release, tried to run, but his body refused. The shadows gripped him, binding him in place. His hands hovered over the camera as if guided by some invisible force. The glass photograph shimmered, pulsing like a heartbeat, calling to him, whispering promises and threats. The children's lullaby grew louder, harmonizing with the silent cries of the trapped faces inside the photograph. Elias's reflection stared back at him, twisted, hollow-eyed, mouth frozen in eternal horror. And in that moment, he realized the terrifying truth. There was no escape. The dead woman's hand brushed against his cheek. "Your face, your soul, belong now," she whispered, wet and hollow. The father leaned closer, placing a cold hand on Elias's shoulder. "Smile," he said softly, "or the photograph will claim more than your face." Elias raised the camera, trembling. The shadows coiled tighter, the whispers intensified. The faces in the photograph pressed outward as if reaching for him. He looked into the lens. His own eyes stared back, but behind them, the countless trapped souls lingered, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. He pressed the shutter. The flash exploded, blinding him. Shadows writhed violently. Faces pressed harder against the glass, whispering louder, reaching out. And then, silence. When Elias opened his eyes, the studio was calm, eerily still. The camera sat quietly on the floor. The father smiled, perfectly composed. The children stood silently at his sides. The dead woman hovered, calm, observing. The photograph lay developing in the tray. Elias's face stared back, hollow and twisted, eyes wide with eternal terror. Behind him, the other trapped souls lingered, watching, waiting, as they always had. The father's voice, calm and chilling, echoed through the room. "The final frame is complete. The photograph waits for the next witness." And when they enter, the cycle continues. Elias's body slumped completely. Physically, he survived. But in the glass, his soul had joined the countless others, trapped forever within the lens, screaming silently. The studio was quiet again, except for the faint, hollow hum of the trapped souls, whispering through the glass, calling out for the next unwitting photographer. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, the father smiled. Elias survived the night, physically. But his soul, his essence, has been trapped forever within the cursed glass of the 1909 studio photograph. The Holloway sisters, the dead woman, the children, they remain, silently waiting for the next photographer brave or foolish enough to step through the doors. The camera still sits on the floor. The glass still holds countless faces, screaming silently, trapped in a moment that never ends. And somewhere, in the shadows, the father smiles, patiently, eternally, knowing the cycle will continue. If you ever come across a forgotten studio, an old family portrait, or a seemingly harmless photograph, pause. Look closely, because the camera may not just capture your image. It may capture you. Some stories never end. And some horrors last forever.